So welcome everyone as you join the panel. I'm really glad to be here and glad to have this opportunity to talk about publishing, hopefully to offer some useful advice. We have an excellent panel of editors and authors with us today to answer some questions about navigating the book publishing process. So let me just start by briefly introducing myself and my fellow panelists. So I'm Jonathan Slapin. I'm a professor at the University of Zurich, and I am a series co-editor for the Oxford OUP ECPR Comparative Politics book series. I also recently took on a role as a co-editor of Legislative Studies Quarterly, and so one of the things we'll talk about is the comparison between books and articles. I'm not the only person on this panel who has had multiple or different roles or editorial roles, and so we'll talk about that from different angles. Next up, we have my series, or until yesterday, I guess, the series co-editor, Susan Scarrow. Susan has, of the University of Houston, Susan has been co-editor of the series for 6 years. And just stepped down from the role, but is happy that she's able to join us today. Nicole Bollier of Munich, University of Munich, will be taking over in Susan's role as the other co-editor of the series in a few weeks' time. Unfortunately, she couldn't make it tonight. Then we have Marlene Mauch of Gesis. She's a very recent series author. Her book, Citizen Support for Democratic and Autocratic Regimes, came out in the series in 2020. We have Tim Haughton of Birmingham, who is also a series co-editor. His book, he's a series author and a co-author of the new book, The New Party Challenge. And then we have Sona Golder of Penn State University, and Sona is the recent co-author of another book in the series, A Multi-Level Electoral Politics Beyond the Second Order Election Model. So thanks to all of the panelists for joining us today. I'm going to start off by asking some questions. We'll go around the panel and answer them, but then I also think maybe we'll go for about 45 minutes or so, maybe a little less, and we'll make sure we have plenty of time for lots of questions from the floor, because I think it's really important that all of you get a chance to ask questions of us. That's why we're here. Okay, so we said we would talk about 3 big questions. Sort of the first would be, should I publish my work as a book or as articles? Second, should I turn my dissertation into a book, and how do I do that? And third, once I have a book, how do I get people to read it? Or how do we get it out there so that people even know that I've done it? How do I promote my work? So let's start with the first of those questions. I'm going to aim the questions at the authors on the panel, and then Susan and I will sort of chime in with our perspective as series editors. And so I'll start with Sona, and I'll ask, I'm a new graduate, I'm just a freshly minted PhD. I'm looking to publish my work. Should I do it as a book or as articles? Perhaps you can speak from your experience as both an author and also as co-editor of BJPS for quite a while. Thanks.
Sure, thank you. So this question of should I publish as a book or as articles, I guess I have 3 main issues I think you'd want to think about. The first and the most important, and ideally the one that would drive everything, is what works best for the substance of your project, right? And it might be that for your project, for your main research that you want to publish, you could do either, right? Because you're examining different aspects of a topic, and that could either be spun out into separate standalone articles, or because you could link those chapters into a coherent book. Reasons to publish as a book as opposed to articles is if the project as a whole is greater than the sum of its parts, I would say. So for example, if you have a theoretical argument that doesn't generate a few very specific and clear tests of the implications, but rather you can think of a lot of sort of smaller ways in which you would test implications, in which you would kind of build up the evidence, right, to create a compelling story about why your argument, should convince people. You might want the space and flexibility of a book to kind of present that evidence. And I can imagine some empirical analyses that on their own maybe don't seem sort of large enough or strong enough to be a standalone article, but they're relevant and they'd be important right alongside other pieces of evidence in a book context. And if you want kind of like deeper description, maybe more qualitative stuff that you're not sure is going to be published as easily, and you want to kind of throw it in ways that seem organically to fit your project, but you don't know if it would fit necessarily in an article, again, right? Sort of a book is the way to go. It gives you more space. My sense is that the typical structure of an article, and again, this is colored by my experience of being an editor at BJPS for 5 years. My sense is that articles have a few different structures, and it's not as flexible, I think, how you would set up an article than what you could do in a book. And so there it kind of depends if the typical article structure doesn't seem to fit, right, how you want to present your work, then a book might be the more obvious choice. So that's all about what's the substance, how is it best to present that to your audience. But there are other concerns, I think, that more practical concerns that you might also want to take into account. So if this is your first book, right, let's say it's your dissertation and you want to turn it into a book, bear in mind that you can use material that's already published in articles in your book, but you can't do the reverse, right? So if you've published your book, you can't then spin off any of those chapters into articles. And if we're talking about your first book and you don't already have publications in that research area, there are a couple of reasons why you might want to publish at least one article, right, from that project before you try to publish the book. And one is just for career purposes, because you want to get tenure, for example, right? You want to get a permanent position. More publications is better than fewer. The other reason, and the book editors can speak to this, more, but my sense is that if you don't already have a record of publishing on a topic, the book editors and then the book manuscript reviewers might be less likely to want to publish that first book. That is purely drawing on my own experiences here. And so maybe things are different and better now, but that was certainly what I found when I was originally trying to get my dissertation published. And then the final thing is a practical concern if you're a junior scholar, right? And again, you want to get promoted, whatever that looks like in the system you're in, whether that's, sort of tenure or something else. What's the departmental culture and expectations for publishing books? Because I've heard of places in the US that expect comparative politics scholars to publish a book. Like you would have to have a book to be seen as someone who could get tenure. But I've also heard of places where junior scholars are highly discouraged from publishing books. And then if you do write a book, the question is, what does it count as? Because in some people's minds, especially if it's not really a book department, the translation between how many articles a book counts as, it might not be that favorable. And those are things to kind of figure out if you are a junior scholar and you're thinking, yeah, I'm going to try to get tenure in this department, these are the senior people who need to be satisfied that this is an appropriate record. I never thought about any of this as a junior scholar. I had written my dissertation kind of like as a book, and I was on the job market a long time. By the time I got my tenure track job, like I was already in the process of getting the book published. But when I was still a junior scholar, I'd gone to visit another department to give a talk or something. Some of the junior people there asked me in all seriousness, how were you allowed to publish a book? Which, you know, really surprised me, but they were, in the context of their department, it was, as junior people, they were really discouraged from publishing a book. Now, I think these strict expectations of whether you need to write a book or whether you should only write articles are less prevalent now than they used to be. But it's just something to be aware of as a junior scholar, that if you have some senior scholars who have some senior colleagues who have really rigid ideas, start some conversations. You can get some allies to help you navigate that issue.
Thanks so much. Excellent advice. Tim, maybe I can turn to you real quick and just see actually if you have any comments or follow-ups on that from maybe the UK perspective.
Yeah, well, firstly, I just want to say I thought what Sonia said, I mean, I agree with everything that she said. I would just underscore that. I mean, perhaps just to unpack one other factor, you know, not just the UK, but obviously this is ECPR. We have colleagues from a number of different European countries here. I would say know the system where you are, but also know the system where you would like to be, because you might actually be thinking that you want to move at some point. So it's very important that you have a sense of that. I would also just underline very much the point that Sona was getting at in terms of the kind of sub-disciplines. I mean, in general, the more kind of heavily quantitative your work, the more likely it is that journal articles might be fine, and it's less critical for a book. What I would say in terms of the British system, those of you who know the British system will know that we have the delights of the research excellence framework. Sometimes books are double weighted, sometimes they're not. Of course, no one knows whether we'll even have a research excellence framework next time round. But generally, books do tend to be double weighted, but that's not always the rule. And one of the crucial things that you should be aware of is that rules and practices do change over time. So I would be very cautious about putting all of your eggs in one basket. And I think one of the things that Sona said I would absolutely underline, which is I think whatever system you're in, an article in a good quality journal is almost a prerequisite to get a job. So I would certainly say that that's really, really important. If I may, John, I would just maybe add one other thing, which I think is quite important, which is, you know, ask yourself sometimes, do you think you'll write another book length thing again if you're talking about turning your dissertation or your PhD thesis? It took me a long time to publish my second book. I did lots of edited volumes and lots of articles and the like. The problem with a full-time academic job is it's difficult to find the time to do that. And so I think that if the book works as a PhD, as Sona was kind of suggesting, you know, I think that if you would like to see it out as a book, why not go for it? And let's also be honest, it's rather nice to look at a book on a shelf sometimes. It looks a bit nicer, it gives you a more positive feeling about your life than sometimes a journal article. So, you know, those sorts of factors should come in. There may be some other things that we might want to turn to in the sort of practicalities about things like the actual publishers you go to and the cost of books and whether it comes out as hardback or paperback. But let me just finish there because I don't want to monopolize the conversation.
Thanks. Excellent. Great points. Susan, do you want to chime in from the editor's perspective, or do you have any further thoughts on that?
Well, I think from the editor's perspective, and this is all great advice, for the editor's perspective, I think that one of the gains you get from a book to sell the book idea, because most people who write books are also writing articles. One of the things about a book is it puts your stamp on a certain area of expertise. So if you're trying to brand yourself, you become identified with a book. And often, even if one of your articles has appeared, people may start citing the book rather than the article, especially if you have the title that encapsulates your argument. So you're known for that book title. So that it can be a help in a career, but as both Tim and Sona said, maybe not the first step in the career. And often these books from dissertations that we're talking about are rewritten. They're not identical with the dissertation, so it's going to take a little time, but meanwhile you can, and time I think is the other element that hasn't been mentioned, getting together a full book, getting it published can take a lot longer, even though the journal review process can seem very long. Journals can get things out in a preprint pretty quickly now. So if you want to get your work disseminated, people starting to cite you and know what you do, getting one piece of that book out as an article can be a quicker way to go, even as you're working on the long-term project of the book. So I don't think it's an either or. I do think it's really both. And then some of the question is about in what sequence. But I do, over my back shoulder, you can see some of the books from the Comparative Politics Series. They're very pretty. It's one of the perks of being an editor is I get sent these books. So I have the joy of reading them and having them on my shelf. And there is something nice about having your work nicely bound and in a series and next to the work of other great authors. So you feel like you're part of a nice club of published authors. So that's a kind of editor's pitch for, you should do this. The question is at what point and with which press and exactly what's going to go into that. But there are lots of reasons to consider a book at some point in your career. And many people, even who have started out just as article publishers, then say, hey, I really do have a longer theme here that I want to pull it together as part of a book because I have a big argument here. That's a topic I've been working on, and this all fits into something larger than I can put into one puzzle piece, which is often what an article is a puzzle piece, whereas the book is more of the whole puzzle.
Excellent, thanks. So Marlena, as the person here among us on the panel who has most recently gone through the process of turning writing a first book, going from dissertation, from PhD student to job and then an author, perhaps you can talk a little bit about what that process was like. For you, and any advice you have for somebody doing it again.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, yeah, I would recommend turning your dissertation into a book. It's worth all the work, but it really is a lot of work. So maybe just a bit on the background, so you know what I'm talking about. So I did write a monograph dissertation, so I had already written the kind of book before that I tried to turn into an actual book because first words of advice, a dissertation is not a book anyone would want to publish usually. So my dissertation had like 300 pages. That's not what publishers want to see. They don't want the 100-page methods chapter. So be prepared, even if you wrote a dissertation, that you will have to put in quite a lot of work again to turn it into an actual book. I can't really speak for people that do paper-based dissertations because that's just my experience. I think for some people it might still be feasible to turn those into a book as well, but I think it's more obvious to turn a monograph into a book. And then I think the process, from my point of perspective, is the most difficult part is obviously getting the publisher. And you should invest quite a lot of time into selecting a publisher. And that means not just checking like reputation lists of what's the most reputable publishing house in your field, but also looking at their program. Do they publish books that are similar to yours? Do they have maybe a series that your book might fit into? Do you perhaps already cite a lot of their books in your own work? So does it just fit into their program? Because you're not going to get a publishing contract with a publishing house that does IR and you're in comparative politics. That doesn't make any sense. So do your research first, and then try to write a proposal. And that's also a time-consuming process, and it can be also a bit of a frustrating process, because it's unlikely you'll get a contract with the first publisher you contact. So you will have to write quite a lot of proposals. And usually most publishing houses publish proposal guidelines on their website, so you can check those out. And you have to write a proposal that's tailored to each publisher. That also means, again, not just writing what your book is about and why it's interesting, but also focusing on things like who should actually read this and who would want to buy this book and what's the possible audience. Because for the publisher, I mean, look at it from publisher's perspective, they want to sell your book. That's what they make money with. So you need to find an angle that convinces the publisher that your book is worth investing their time and money in. And also think again about the audience, not just a professional audience, but also can it be used for teaching purposes, for instance, because that sells quite a lot of books. So try to think about, who will want to read this and what gap does it fill and how does it fit, as I said before, how does it fit into the program? And what gap in the literature does it fill, and who would benefit from reading the book? For me, that writing the proposal, I think that's an interesting thing for many junior authors. That took a couple of months to actually go from my dissertation, rewriting that, or at least sketching the rewrite I was about to do. I basically halved the book in the end. Sketching that and writing the proposals, that took a couple of months already, and then contacting publishers, waiting for replies. I think it took about, from actually submitting the dissertation to getting a positive reply from OUP, took about a year. So factor that in. It's not going to be a quick process. But that included actually rewriting the book already. So shortening most of the parts, streamlining the argument. Again, think of it from a reader's perspective when you're rewriting your book. I mean, I think my original dissertation had like 40 hypotheses. My book has none. Like, I mean, basically it has 2, like very broad ones. It had a 60-page methods chapter. Now I have like a 10-page methods chapter. So that's things you should try and consider. And also, you don't need to, when you rewrite your book or your dissertation, you don't need to go into all the details anymore. I mean, you have obviously read all the literature because you just wrote a dissertation and you've developed a very convincing argument, and that's important, but the reader doesn't know, you don't need to tell the reader you've read every single article in that field. They don't need to know about that. You just have to have done it. So try to find a bigger picture without going too much into the details. And don't be afraid to cut things out. You don't need to prove, again, that it's not the dissertation committee that's going to read this. So you don't need to prove that you've read everything. I think that's probably the most important strokes. And then maybe just to get an idea of how it goes. So you write a proposal, you send it to the publishers. It can help a lot to get in touch with the editors beforehand. Maybe just at a conference like this, for instance, chat to the editors, talk to them about your ideas, whether it might fit into their series, and you can get a much better chance of someone actually evaluating your proposal. Because you can probably imagine, good publishing houses get a lot of proposals from unknown authors, and it's going to be hard to get a contract just cold calling them. So you submit your proposal, they give you a reply. and then you basically develop a time frame together with your managing editor. For me, that wasn't that long actually, because I'd already done the rewriting before I submitted the proposal. I mean, I did some fine tuning after that. And then it goes into peer review once you submitted your manuscript. You get feedback within, I think I got the feedback within 3 or 4 months from 2 reviewers. And then I had to reply to those reviews. The reviews actually, maybe that's also helpful for some of you thinking about whether you want to publish a book or not. The reviews were actually very, very kind and much more friendly than I'm used to from journal articles. And much more encouraging also. So you get time to do the revisions, and then the book gets published. There was actually a fairly fast process for me. So as I said, I think I started working on the proposal in spring of 2018, and the book was published about 2 years later. But the first year of that went into actually getting the contract. So once I had the contract, that's once I had the proposal accepted, once I had the contract, it was about half a year of time where I actually had to do some work, and then it was just the publishing process, proofs and stuff like that, typesetting. So that was actually quite fast, I felt. Yeah, I think that's the most important points, but I'm happy if anyone has any more specific questions to answer them.
Excellent, thanks. From the editor's perspective, I'll just sort of echo everything that you said, and just say that that sort of timeline and that and the process that Marlene described is, I think, fairly normal. That seems like a fairly standard process for a first book. I would highlight again the importance of having a good book proposal. I think people sometimes, especially submitting a book, a first book, don't realize how important that is. But you can sort of treat it as like an abstract, where you have a small number of pages in which to convince somebody that this is worth publishing without them having seen the whole 150, 200 word that book. You can tailor your prospectus a little bit for different publishers, but I think everybody's asking for more or less the same thing. There are templates available on the website, and Susan and I have a template and some information as well that we share with first-time authors. It doesn't always have to follow the same format or the same, exactly the same as what's on the publisher's website. But it needs to be able to tell you why your project is important to a scholarly audience and why political scientists will want to read it. The only other thing that I'll quickly add is I think that the amount of time that it takes and whether and how you actually have to how much work you have to do to turn your dissertation into a book depends a lot on how you write your dissertation and what your dissertation committee demands of you and wants of you in the dissertation. So if you know up front, for whatever reason, that you really want to publish a monograph, right, and you want to publish it, then and you write your dissertation like you would write a book, without the the 60-page methods chapter and the 100-page literature review, then it's a simpler process. If your committee, for whatever reason, needs to see the in-depth methods process chapter or whatever else, if they insist on that, then it's going to be a longer process. But if you can get your speak with your advisors, speak with your committee, communicate if you have external advisors through the department what the departmental expectations are, and you write your dissertation as you would a book, then that time period can be shortened. But I know dissertation committees and universities have different attitudes on that. Susan, do you want to?
Can I jump in just with one thing that John and I as editors and I'm sure that John and Nicole as co-editors need to do is, if you submit a proposal, to the CPS series, the co-editors will read it and often will send it back and say, we think you can do better. Now, not all series editors will do that, but this is because a lot of people don't actually hit the mark when they put together this proposal. And the most likely thing we'll say is, we think this project sounds more interesting than your description of it. That you have forgotten to say in the first paragraph why anyone would want to read this book. And you have forgotten to say what's cool about what you've done and what's new here and why is this great. And so often what we are prodding people to do is to do a better job of selling the project. And now that's not hyping it, overhyping it, but to be more conscious that you have something good here. And that is probably, if you've been working on a project for 6 years or whatever, if it's your dissertation, then you've worked on it, you've probably forgotten why it's interesting, or there's a high chance. So I would say that's my biggest advice is, of all the, whatever the formalities, you should need to have conviction about why you're doing this. And it's not that you're trying to persuade your dissertation advisors that it's good enough, which is part of what you do in a dissertation and why you have that 100-page methods section to defeat your advisors. But now you're trying to, why should anyone spend any time reading this? So that would be my biggest advice. And I expect the journal editors would also give you the same advice for an abstract for an article too. It's something, perhaps the skill that's least well taught for political science. We teach you good methods, but we don't necessarily teach you good how to pithily get your message down to 2 sentences of why this matters.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. And Nicole Bolaya and I will be available to, or if you have questions about a prospectus or a project, that's what we see our role as, and that's what Susan and I have done for the last several years. Susan for the last 6. So yeah, and so when we receive a prospectus, usually we will oftentimes say, look, we can send this to Dominic Byatt at OUP, but we suggest that you go back and strengthen it in this way, because then it'll have there'll be more of a chance that Dominic will look favorably on it. Sona or Tim, do either of you want to chime in on this topic?
I had a couple of quick thoughts. One is that I think Jonathan's right, that to the extent that you can just write the dissertation, right, sort of as a book, that makes things a lot easier. And to the extent that some of your committee members really want to see everything spelled out, they want to see the methods, there are certain hoops that you jump through as a dissertation, right, as a doctoral student, right, just that you need to demonstrate to your committee that you have certain skills. Which is what Marlene was saying, like you have all this stuff in the dissertation, and then you don't actually need to tell your readers everything that you've actually done. Maybe one way of splitting the difference would be, you say, oh, I'm going to have an appendix to this chapter where I spell it all out. That way your dissertation committee members see that, but you've still written the chapter the way you would want to write it, sort of for the book. And then you're going to be able to cut that appendix down, sort of probably quite drastically, right, for the book. And you'll be able to, take all the regression tables and maybe just have a few plots, just like show some coefficient plots, and maybe, right, maybe that's fine. I would recommend looking at a couple of books that you really like how the authors wrote them, you really like the structure. And it doesn't have to be on a topic that's at all related to your own, but just to be thinking about, okay, how did the author start this book? Right? Did they start with some examples? Was there a story? Like, how did they kind of present the whole overall picture? And then how did they talk about data at some point? Did they find some pattern that you think this would work for my project, right? And then I think that really helps you see, what is this going to look like as a book?
Absolutely, good advice, Tim. Yeah.
So I would just add one thing, which is to say develop that elevator pitch as soon as possible. You never know when it might be useful. And just to give you my own experience, so the book that was published in the OUP series last year, I remember a few years ago being in communication with a senior scholar in a slightly different field, but in political science. And I said, oh, who is the commissioning editor at OUP? And this senior colleague, being very friendly, not just responded to me, but copied that particular person into the email. So I needed to respond pretty quickly to say, this is what the book is about, right? So it's to say that you never know when opportunity is going to come a knocking. So be prepared. Be prepared to sell your idea, even if it's still a bit raw, it isn't developed, but be able to sell that idea, because you just don't know when the opportunity may come.
Excellent advice, and that leads us right into the last question that we said we would tackle, the third question that we said we would tackle very nicely, which is, you've now written the book, it's been published. How do you promote it? Who's going to read it? Tim, you want to take that?
Okay, so I had to, I sat down and I wrote down some thoughts earlier on today about this question. So I would say the starting assumption is, yes, your book is amazing, but not everyone is going to immediately agree with that or see it. But you can persuade people to read or buy your book. And remember that we're all time poor, and we all have short or shorter attention spans than we did in the past. Okay, so what would I say? Well, one of the areas that I'm interested in political science is about campaigning. And one of the lessons in campaigning is that when the enthusiastic are fed up with the message, it's probably about the time which it really is cutting through to the people that it should be cutting through to. In other words, one of the things that you have to do with your book is you do have to put in quite a bit of time and quite a bit of effort to try and promote it. And, you know, if you don't do that, then some of the annoying, irritating people in political science with egos the size of Texas will be promoting their book. So don't feel bad about this. Okay. So, and, you know, don't also feel bad about it. You've put in months, years, even decades sometimes into a book. So you want people to actually read it. So indeed, segueing from what we said just before, what your message is, your key arguments, your key kind of bumper sticker arguments, I think your elevator pitch is really, really important. I mean, Susan mentioned before how important a title is, and I think the title is also worth something really worth thinking about. We think about books like Bowling Alone or Clash of Civilizations or End of History. We may not agree with those books and what they argue, but you know exactly what they're about, right? So the title, I think, is something that's worth emphasizing. And this is often something that's quite, going back to all of Marlene's excellent points on the dissertation, dissertations often have pretty dull titles because they have to kind of cover all bases. Books can be a bit more exciting, so spending a bit of time thinking about the book. Fourth thing I would say here is think about the audience. So who is it, yeah, that you actually want to read your book? And it may be that, for example, you know, my work is about Central and Eastern Europe and about party politics, and one hopes that the broader political science community might be vaguely interested in what I'm doing. So that means you have to think about those different audiences in terms of trying to promote it. And so to keep the campaigning theme going, think about the modes of communication. So first, I would say, you know, good old-fashioned presentations are quite important. By the way, do a presentation in your home institution, right? I'm amazed how many academics do not present in their home institutions, and people in their own departments haven't got a clue what they do. And that's often quite useful, because you can be saying, oh, you know, my colleague Maya's just written this great book about the Middle East. You should read it. And I say that to colleagues I come across at conferences. So presentations and tweaking them for kind of different for different audiences. I would though say, you know, Zoom and online platforms are very helpful, but be careful sometimes about time differences. I remember giving a presentation on our book to an audience in California, in which Anna Ksimawa Busa was, you know, it was her lunchtime and it was my 10 o'clock. and she was like super smart, and I couldn't answer her questions that well. So, you know, do think about the practicalities of these kind of things sometimes. Second thing to think about is panels, organizing panels, right? Be proactive in organizing panels. So sometimes because other speakers are real magnets. So, I mean, our book is about new parties in Central and Eastern Europe. There's another brilliant book being published recently on new party or on party system change in Western Europe. And that's Sarah Hobart and Catherine de Vries's brilliant book. So I propose to Sarah and Catherine that we have a joint panel at EPSA, right? We got a good audience, mostly because Sarah and Catherine are superstars. So they are the magnets that can bring in the audience. And whilst they're listening to the superstars, they might just listen to us mere mortals saying what we have to say. But equally, we put together another panel for MPSA, that Lenka Bushtikova, who had a book out, Fernando Casal-Batoa, who's just published a superb book in the OUP series, and myself. The three of us presented our books kind of together about party politics as change. A third kind of mode is about blogs and kind of newspapers. And this is where, for example, I've done quite a few things over the years for the Washington Post Monkey Cage, often around elections. And that's often a good way of not just talking about your book, but obviously, but linking your book into a recent election. So, for example, with Emilia Zankina, we wrote a piece on the recent Bulgarian elections. Well, not the recent Bulgarian elections. There've been lots of elections in Bulgaria this year, but the first elections this year. And we were able then to talk a little bit about new parties, and there was a big new party breakthrough there. So that allowed us to promote the book a little bit. But if you also want to see how you can use other publications to promote, look at what actually Fernando has done. Fernando Casal-Batoa, he had a piece published in Journal of Democracy. He also, and this is the ECPR conference, he also had a great piece published in the ECPR blog recently, which got quite a lot of traction and quite a lot of interest. So those are kinds of things to think about. A fourth thing that I would just emphasize is about social media in general. Now, Twitter, I struggle to summarize things in 240 characters. I can't understand these people who are able to do it. I do it very badly, but I can say a few things and post a few pictures, copy in a few people who will kindly retweet things. People like John has retweeted a few things when I've mentioned the book. And a few other friends. So that's one of the ways of kind of getting the message out there. Other social media, it's also useful just to emphasize to your friends and others through Facebook or whatever that you can get it out there. I would also say endorsements are quite helpful. I know people are sometimes a bit, think what's the point of endorsements? And sometimes publishers won't encourage you to come forward with endorsements, but I think they can be quite helpful. I'm really pleased that we have Catherine de Vries and Stephen Whitefield saying very nice things about our book on the back of the book. That says to a broader political science party politics audience that this is an interesting book to read rather than our usual kind of group of Central East Europeans. You might want to think about a dedicated website, but that actually takes quite a lot of time and effort. So be maybe cautious about that. And my final piece of advice is to say, do complete as fully as you can the publisher's marketing form and take it quite seriously. Usually it arrives when you're quite exhausted. I remember in February last year, submitting the manuscript to OUP thinking, thank God we've submitted it. And then Olivia Wells by return of mail says, thank you very much for sending the manuscript. Here is the OUP marketing form, and you look at it and you think, oh my God, it's like 10 or 12 pages. Do I really have the energy to do it? Well, the bottom line is you should do it because publishers need the help and need the support, right? So, you know, my main message is to be as proactive as possible, but use the opportunities that you have. And if you do that, you will get things out there. And because I'm a good old-fashioned Keynesian, I believe in things like the multiplier effect. So if you do get out there and you do inject a little bit of a message out there, it will often then create a momentum of its own. So that's me probably talking too long, but those are some thoughts.
Excellent. No, I think those are all spot on, and very useful. I think, having that sales pitch, that short blurb, and filling out that marketing form probably helps you develop that to some extent, and having that short thing that you can put out there on Twitter in particular is really helpful. I think the one thing to note in this sort of publishing world today is that, we say that university presses or presses in general are in the business of selling books, and that I've sort of recently learned is only sort of true. They are definitely in the business of selling books, but they're not in the business of selling books the way that we typically have thought about books being sold, which is hard covers and paperbacks on bookshelves. And we can see our sales data that there aren't all that, people don't buy that many books anymore. But what they do is download them from university libraries and read them online. And through this, the Oxford now has this Oxford Politics Trove, which is sort of the online bundle that they sell to university libraries. And each publisher has a different version of this. And they they count quite closely and look at download statistics and do people read the books? Do people read chapters? And so you sort of have to think about, like, we're not in this world of selling paperbacks to the same extent anymore, but you want to be engaged and you want to have people know that your book is out there and know that it's in, because they're going to go to their university library, they're going to look to download it, they're going to ask their librarian maybe to buy it or to buy electronic access to it. And you want to think about ways that can drum that up. Susan, Sona, Marlena, anything to add to that question?
I think we should take some questions from the audience.
I agree.
Or put them in the chat.
Yeah, so let's see how this will work. I think that's probably the you can either do the hand raising tool or put them in the chat and then go from there. So feel free to ask us your questions. We have no questions about how to go to. Here we go. There's somebody in the chat. How do you choose a publisher? What kind of criteria can you recommend? So we can speak about this from the publisher's perspective or from the author's perspective. I think I'll take a first stab at this. So I think the advice that Marlena gave first off is really important and really excellent, which is look at what the publishers are publishing. Are they publishing books that are relevant to your field? So you'll have big publishing houses like Oxford or Cambridge, right, which will publish in most areas of political science, but even Oxford will admit that they don't always publish, in every area, and they do have special expertise in some areas. And so look at what look at the catalog of books that have recently come out from the presses and whether or not yours would fit in there. Look at whether or not there's a series for which your book would be a good fit, such as the Comparative Politics Series or any other. And then bear in mind that a lot of, especially like the American university presses, will have a specific area that they focus on. So, for example, Cornell University Press is known for IR. I don't know. There's Kansas University Press has a series in presidential politics. So look for somebody that would be willing to publish, that area. Does anybody else?
I would say ask your friends too, or your colleagues if they're submitting. One of the things, if you have a deadline, a time deadline, some publishers are faster than others in giving you a decision. What you'd love is a publisher that will tell you no in a week. If they're going to tell you no, you want to find it out quickly. So that what's worst is to spend a year and then you finally get an answer that says, no, we're not going to send it out for review. So you do want to, and that can be because they're between editors, or, you know, there's something going on at that press right now that it's not a good time to submit. But, you know, if you know other people who are submitting, you can find out what was their experience. So I would say that's also important, especially if you're at a career juncture where you do want to get a decision fairly quickly, which most people do once they've got a project. They don't want to wait forever.
If I can just jump in, one way of trying to convince the editor that your book would be a good fit for the kind of thing they publish is when you write to them, you sort of say, well, I am writing to you because you published, right, and then list a couple of recent books that they publish, you know, recent, not stuff from, you know, 30 years ago, that, and maybe they don't publish that kind of work anymore, but stuff that's recent, and you would say, like, I've used this, you know, like, my book is kind of in this vein, and then they can see already, like, you're helping them see your book and how it would fit.
Absolutely.
Can I,
Tim?
yeah, I was just going to reiterate this point about the series, which I think is quite helpful, because one of the points about a series is that because you're with other books in covering similar kinds of themes, it actually helps to promote your book itself and gives it a place. And I think in a way, apologies, John, I mean, I can see there's another question about a kind of niche topic there in chat, and I would certainly say that however niche you think your topic is, it's likely that it might fit within some kind of series that's offered by some kind of publisher. So, you know, where are those other books that cover these kind of things, the ones that you're citing and referring to and engaging with in your book? That may well give you a really good idea about which publishers to think about. The only other thing I would say, and this, sorry, starts to sound a little instrumental, and I hate to be instrumental, but you also want to think about how particular publishers are viewed in the academic community. Some places, if you go for jobs, can be sniffy if you don't have a job with if you don't have a book with a significant university press. So you may want to think about that. One of the advantages sometimes of going with trade publishers is they can be a bit more active when it comes to marketing the book, maybe more likely to put it out in paperback. So these are kinds of things to really think about. You may need to understand the system in which that you're functioning in terms of your job as well.
Excellent. Yes, Marlene, do you want to? Oh, sorry, I have an echo here. Marlene, do you want to talk about how you found your publisher, or how you came to OUP?
Yeah, basically what I said before. So I also have an echo now. Yeah, I looked at what different publishers published, and OUP has already published quite a lot of books in the political support, comparative politics topics, so that seemed like a good fit, and obviously they are very reputable in political science as well, so that was a nice bonus. But I would also go for topical fit more than reputation if you approach publishers. It also doesn't help if you get like a super great publisher, but they don't publish anything else in your field, and then the people that typically read books from them are not going to be interested in your book either. Yeah, and maybe also on the topic of how long it takes for them to get back to you. I also had the experience that sometimes it helps a lot to send a reminder email after a couple of weeks with no reply. And yeah, you will probably get a no, but that's good to know, as Susan said. If you get a no, if you hear a no, you want to do it quickly. So don't be afraid to ask after a couple of weeks of no reply what the status is.
John, can I point out that I've posted a link in the chat to a recording that John and I did when we interviewed OUP editor Dominic Bayat on what his thoughts are on the publication industry now, and giving some of the same advice that we've been giving here. This is a YouTube video, so you can go watch it later, share it with your friends. This hopefully will be good advice and you'll find it useful.
Yes, yeah. Susan and I did this this interview with Dominic a little while ago for ECPR and for the conference. Also, if you just Google Dominic Byatt as well, he has some very interesting YouTube videos about the state of the publishing field that explain a bit, like, you know, some of the changes that have happened that are interesting that might be interesting if you're thinking about publishing a book. I see we have some other questions in the chat window. And so I was going to just quickly see what we've covered and what we haven't. So finding a niche topic, we've covered that a little bit, but I think that speaks to this. You know, look for what publishers publish, and there are publishers that have specific areas. Publishing advice for pitching or publishing a book containing empirical material that's a bit older and can't be updated for practical reasons, even if it might be interesting. How do you communicate this to publishers and reviewers? I think this is an interesting question. I mean, in fact, I was just looking for other reasons for European Parliament roll call data. And it seems that there's actually no good European Parliament roll call data, as best I can tell, unless somebody can point me otherwise. It ended in 2009, and nobody's cleaned up the website since then. And so you could spend a lot of time doing it, or maybe somebody else is doing it, maybe I'm wrong about it, or you can just publish using the old data. And somebody was asking me about this, and my advice was, well, if you can tell an interesting theoretical story, and you can tell you have an interesting puzzle that's going to speak to a broader audience in political science, then I think people are perfectly willing to allow you to test that theory on data that's a bit older, and they won't have a problem with that. I mean, it depends on how old is old. I mean, we can also think about a lot of really interesting books on political development and historical events and older data. So I don't think the fact that your data might, you know, end in the year 2000 or 2010 and now it's 2021, I don't really know that matters if so long as it's not the data that are driving the story, but rather the question, the theory, the puzzle. And so I think that's the real question. Next, so when revising the dissertation, when do you stop in terms of cutting? And what's a good maximum in terms of word length or word count for a book? This is sort of an interesting question too. I mean, it used to be publishers sort of have a top end on what they are willing to publish, and I think most books are somewhere in the neighborhood between 80,000 and 120,000 words on the high end. You know, something in the neighborhood of 150 pages. And I think that's sort of practical reasons for that. And then like people don't want to read more. And then also, but they have to read enough. There has to be enough there to make it, be a book. And so I think in terms of actual word count, that's sort of like the that neighborhood. But interestingly, I think publishing and book publishing has changed a bit, and now word counts are a little bit more flexible, both because things are moving more online, and then also because there's these new opportunities to publish different length things. So it had been a time where every single thing we had to publish was either 10,000 words as a journal article or 90,000 words as a book. And, you know, God forbid you want to write 40 or 50,000 words or 4,000 words, you know, forget it. And now we have short form articles of 4,000 words. We have articles in journals that range from 9,000 to 12,000 words. We have these Cambridge University Elements series, which are 40, 50,000 words. We have full on books. So I think these word count sort of like, we're a little bit more flexible these days than we used to be in terms of how we can get things published. Maybe does anybody else on the panel want to chime in on any of these questions? Any thoughts on this?
But maybe just some empirics. Just checked my initial proposal expected 89,000 words. So that's exactly ballpark what you said, John.
Yeah, I think that's what the sort of the range that most books are. Something on the order of like, 5 to 7, 5 to 8 chapters. You sort of think of an introduction, theory, uh, maybe a data chapter, 2 or 3 empirical chapters, a large empirical chapter, a case study, and then a conclusion seems to be the sort of like standard book format. Of course, not everything always has to follow that format, but that's tends to be the way things go.
So I'd like to jump in again as an editor, as the crusty old off-going series editor, to say, with encouragement for people who are thinking of writing a book, but also to say, when people say, what's the hardest part about writing the book? I think it's writing the book. I mean, that it's as editors, we see people who come up who tell us they're going to give us proposals, and we wait and we wait and we wait, and then we say we're interested in the proposal. When are you going to have the manuscript ready to send out for review? And they say, okay, but it may take a little while, 3 months. Oh, and then we get excuses of why it's longer and longer. So clearly the hardest part in some ways is the part you have to do. And maybe that's not encouraging for you, but it's not to say that you should look at publishers as being the biggest hurdle. The biggest hurdle is you have to write the book, and you have to get it ready and packaged and ready for an audience, and no longer a dissertation, but now it's seeking a broader audience than your 4 committee members who you had to get it passed. So the work of writing a book is tough, and it always takes longer, and editors probably expect it to take longer than you tell them that it's going to take you, because they've seen it before. But it's on you. If you want to write a book, there's probably a publisher out there who wants to publish your book. And so you may decide you don't want to write books. It's not the best use of your time or the best way to get your scholarship out in the community. But if you want to do it, you should definitely keep working on it, and there probably will be a good way for you to get your book published. So that's my encouraging note. So go for this. And as Marlena said, the reviewers tend to be nicer. They may say no, but they probably won't savage you in the way that some journal reviewers do.
Yeah.
And also maybe just one word about the hard part being writing the book. Once you've written the dissertation, turning it into a book isn't that bad anymore, because it's mostly deleting things. So once you've done the dissertation, you've done the hardest part.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's absolutely right. And I'll second all those points. It does raise another point, which I'll just bring up, which is what do you submit, and at what point do you approach a publisher, and what point do do you send off the prospectus in the book? And I think as a first-time author, and somebody who is, if you're a first-time author and somebody who's just finished a dissertation, and if you're looking to publish a dissertation, something that was a dissertation in particular, then you need to have the full manuscript, or as close to it, I would say, as possible. It may change. It may reviewers may ask you to add something to it, or add a chapter, or think about something in a different way, or rewrite. But I would recommend that before you, for a first-time author, first book, if you want to maximize your chances of having an editor look at something, have that manuscript ready to go, and be able to say, here's the prospectus. If you're interested in it, I can send you the manuscript tomorrow. Or it cuts down to one hurdle. So the scenario where Susan says we're chasing people who have sent us proposals years ago, that tends to be not the people who have just written their dissertation, right? That's usually somebody who is in a position where they can get a book contract on the basis of a prospectus and maybe a chapter or something like that. And that's probably not most of us. And so like Marlena said, you have the dissertation, you've done the hardest part. If it's in a format that you think is readable as a book and publishable as a book, then why not have a go at it? Anybody else? Tim or Sona, do you guys want to add anything on those points? No. Multidiscipline. Oh, Tim, go for it.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna just say one other thing, that absolutely kind of get the proposal in there. Get, once you've got the commissioning editors interested in something, they want you to produce. I'll embarrass Susan now, but she was super encouraging and positive for us to finish the book. Kevin and I have a kind of, not quite a perfectionist streak, but there's always another new party, there's always another new set of elections to put in. And bumping into Susan at conferences, she was always very supportive and helpful and encouraging, and kind of saying, it's a great idea, you just got to deliver it. So I think that get over that first hurdle, get the commissioning editors interested. If they're excited and interested in this kind of idea, they've invested something in wanting to actually see you deliver.
Absolutely. There's one more question here in the chat, which is multidisciplinary book. How do you choose an editor there, or a series editor? This is also so back to the same question. Find the publisher that's willing to do it, but that's also slightly trickier with multidisciplinary. The more multidisciplinary you are, the trickier it is. Unfortunately, I think. I do think, and this goes for everybody, multidisciplinary or not, you need to know what your audience is for the book, right? You need to have a clear audience. So you can draw on all sorts of different disciplines in your work. And I think all of us do draw across disciplines when we're doing our work as political scientists. We think about economics and sociology and psychology and all the rest of it. But you have to make sure that there's an audience then for what you do, and the editor is going to want to see that audience. Is going to want to know that the audience is there, because that's the audience that you're going to pitch your book to, sell it to. They're the ones who are going to download or buy or read the book. And so even if you have a multidisciplinary book, try to make sure that it's sold, I think, to the extent possible within a discipline, right? Which is not to say that you can't take a multidisciplinary approach or not draw on different things, but make sure that you have that clear audience there, because that'll make it easier to find a publisher and to sell it to a publisher, and then to find an audience for it.
Let me jump in with the question of how, no one's asked yet, but what's the etiquette of how many publishers can you approach? And how do you have to do this? This is where journal publishing and book publishing are slightly different, are very different, because you can only submit an article to one journal at a time, and you will be asked, have you submitted this elsewhere? And they will refuse to read it if you submitted it elsewhere. If you're submitting just a proposal, it's not improper to approach an editor and say, would you be interested in this project? And you can, if you have several presses, you could approach several presses at once and find out if any of them are interested in it. And then if several are, then you can choose which one you want to send it out for review. You should only send the manuscript out for review at one press. But if you're just trying to find out, might they be interested, it is not impolite or improper to approach more than one press at once. Now, there are reasons why you may not want to do that. I mean, if you get a no, you may want to rewrite and figure out what was wrong with you might get some feedback. And so you might be able to improve the proposal based on the first editor's response. So you may decide you don't want to approach more than one editor at once, because you're trying to figure out how to package this and who's going to want it and why. But the rules against doing this with an article are very strict. Never. The rules for doing this with books are for the first stage, before you're asking them to send it out for review, when you're just trying to find out, do you think this would fit with your series? I have this project, would it fit with your series? You can have that kind of interchange with an editor and with multiple editors as you're trying to find out, say, does this multidisciplinary project, is it ever going, would you consider this a fit for your series? So that's something you could ask.
Absolutely. Sona, did you want to chime in before?
Oh, well, I had a question based on what your response to thinking about a book that is, at least to some extent, multidisciplinary. And it sounds like you're saying, well, pick kind of the core discipline, and you would approach maybe an editor in that core discipline. Would it make sense at all to be looking at a publishing house where they definitely do publish in the other disciplines as well? You know, like as opposed to a publisher that maybe they don't do any forecasting stuff at all, right? If in the example in the chat is you've got a book that's, you know, political science, demography, and forecasting. To the extent that you're looking at a publishing house that kind of has these example books that you like see yours fitting in these multiple disciplines, like maybe that's something you're still going to pick an editor, right, in one of those disciplines, like maybe in political science, but you might say, oh, like this could be of interest, right, and could well be marketed perhaps in these other fields. I don't know if that is useful, would be useful at all, as my stuff's all squarely in political science. So I just don't have experience kind of thinking through how to link it into other disciplines.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, a great question. I mean, so my personal take on it would be like, if we took this particular example, say political science and demography, right? Those are two things that go together really well, and you'll find publishers that do stuff on, you know, the relationship between the demography and political science quite regularly. And then you think about forecasting. Well, forecasting, right? You can either think about like maybe like, you know, like a methods book on how to do forecasting, right, in this particular area, or you can think about forecasting as the tool that you're using to answer a political science question using demographic data. And so if it's the latter that we're talking about, then I would definitely aim towards a publisher or a series that's sort of, you know, if your main question is sort of a squarely political science one and it's the type of data and method that you're using, then that would be the type of publisher I would approach, or that's the way I would approach the project. If it's something like, you know, if your main interest is using forecasting models, right, and you happen to be doing this in political science, and then I would look for like a Sage Methods type thing. The problem is that I think that publishers really are like, you know, they have an acquisitions editor for political science, they have an acquisitions editor for demography, they have an acquisitions editor for methods, and you have to have one of them who you're going to approach. So you might think about like, well, the publisher does all these different things and therefore it would be a good fit. But I think ultimately you sort of have to sell yourself as like, this project is mainly about this, and therefore this is why I'm approaching you. Yeah, Tim.
Can I just add, so to pick on Miroslav's question, I mean, I think this is where, again, a kind of very short elevator pitch is going to be very helpful, because you can actually fire off quite a few emails simultaneously and see which one gets a kind of positive response. And of course, you know, you can, if you're approaching series editors in this same publishing house, you can kind of say, I've also, you know, because I know this is interesting to the demographers, I've also sent it to this, you know, this other person. I mean, if you're still talking about the same publishing house, that's fine. If they're interested, they'll run with it. But I think that's where the kind of low cost, what do you think about this idea, is a good stage, rather than worrying too much, you know, building up such a complex proposal and then thinking, oh my God, which of these ones do I go to? Try and sort out that question a bit earlier, I guess. But you know, one other thing I would just say, I mean, I often say this to my PhD students, most of the things I know about academia, I've learned from my mistakes. So don't worry, you know, we all make lots and lots of mistakes on these things, but you know, just have a go and ask people, and most publishers will give you a pretty straight answer, series editors, if they think it sounds interesting or not. And if they're not interested, you will find someone else who will publish it. Don't lose heart.
That leads me to think about one more point that I'll raise, which is who do you approach in terms of the acquisitions editor or somebody like Susan and myself, series editors, right? So we, you know, the way this works is like, you know, Susan and I are series editors for one single series which is a joint venture between Oxford University Press and ECPR. And Oxford University Press controls what gets published in this series. And ultimately, the decision as to whether or not to publish a book within the series or with Oxford University Press in general within the field of political science is a decision made by Dominic Byatt in conjunction with the board of Oxford University Press. So Dominic Byatt gets reviews, he approaches the board issues a contract, and that's the deal, right? So what your ultimate goal is to get Dominic to get two reviewers plus Dominic to say that this is a good project that they can approach the OUP board with and issue a contract. So you might ask, like, why approach Susan and I at all? You could just send an email to Dominic. And that's true. And in some cases, that might be the way to go. And maybe that's a way that some people here have gone. And in fact, it's the way Ollie Proksch and I did that when we wrote our book. So then, of course, the question is, what do Susan and I do, or what now do Nicole Bolier and I do? And here I think the answer is that if you're a first-time author and you find a series for which your book is a good fit, the series editors can be really helpful in, as we said, looking at your proposal, looking at your prospectus, and giving you a sense as to whether or not it might be a good fit for the series. Having somebody to approach before you get to Dominic Byatt, because once you get to Dominic Byatt and Dominic says no, that's a no, right? Then you're done with OUP, right? But if you get to Susan and I, and we say, oh, well, we think this might have a chance, but not in the current state. And if you redo this and this and this, then you might have a better chance. And then we might be able to give you a better idea and help you to clear that first hurdle than if it just went straight to OUP. And I think that's true for all series editors. I think both not only us and our one series, but also other series at OUP or Cambridge. And so somebody said, you can actually approach a whole bunch of series editors and have conversations with series editors without ever having had a conversation with the press itself. The acquisitions editor may not even know that you're interested in the actual press until you have until you're at the point when you're actually ready to approach the press. And so I think that's important. And so I think this is something that I did not know when I was a first-time author and when I was looking to publish my dissertation, and sort of in hindsight wish I had known. Susan?
Yeah, can I say, since we don't have questions in the chat, but there's a question that might be there, because we're talking a lot about first-time authors, but Tim mentioned that he had been an editor, produced an edited book. So some of you may wonder about edited books and how that fits in. And again, there's often the question of, do I do a special issue? I've got a collection, I run an ECPR workshop. Do we try for a special issue of a journal? Do we try for a book? And so I guess we've got some, journal editors here too, who might be able to address that from that point of view. But I think on both sides, both the book side and the journal side, it's a little harder than it used to be to produce these kind of collections. And what makes for a winning proposal can often be the closeness or the integration of the different components of whether they're going to be chapters or whether they're going to be articles, how closely do they speak to each other? For a book, if all the chapters are using the same data source or are some other way integrated, that might be a reason why this is sort of like a monograph, but the chapters are written by different people, but they're all the chapters are asking pretty much the same question, perhaps with reference to different countries or to different eras, but there's some coherence there. So it's not just 10 chapters that happen to have political party in the title, but there's nothing else common about that. So there's some real through line of why is this a collection together? And I think that's probably true for the special issues too. They all have to be high quality and they have to be related. And so there should be some reason why they're being published as a special issue rather than just as individual components. But maybe I'll turn it over to Sona and John to see your views on edited book versus special issue versus let's just publish these all separately.
The journal I edited didn't do special issues, so I've got I don't really I don't have a sense of what authors would have like been thinking through in terms of that.
So to be honest with you, I don't know whether, I guess LSQ does do special issues, but I haven't encountered that yet. I did edit a special issue for Journal of European Politics at one point in time. I would say one of the differences between special issues for journals and edited volumes for books is it also depends on the journal, but journal special issues, oftentimes there's no guarantee that every article that's submitted will get published. So it can be the case that there's sort of the, that individual chapters, individual articles in the journal special issues will not make the cut because the reviewers didn't like it or didn't pass the reviewing stage. I think that's in a book, a special edited or an edited volume in a book that doesn't really happen. So that's one major difference there. Journals handle special issues in a whole variety of ways. I know, for example, when European Union Politics does a special issue, because I've reviewed for them, they send out all of the articles to the same set of reviewers. So you agree to review every article that comes out in the special issue. When I handled it, and then the main editor in charge of the journal is the editor ultimately makes all of the decisions. So there might be a special editor for the issue. They might organize who's submitting papers, but they have no control over which reviewers are selected or what ends up making the final cut or not. When I did a special edit, a volume for Journal of European Public Policy for JEP, they basically hand the editorial process over to the people that are in charge of the special issue. And so then the special issue editors select the reviewers and everything else. So it's very different depending upon the journal. The book process is much more the very same as a monograph, right? So we receive a prospectus. You have to tell the editor why this is a book that's worth publishing. All the prospectus will looks very similar to what a prospectus would for a monograph. It goes out to review. For the one thing that's changed in this area is I think it used to be the case that you could probably get a book contract for a special for an edited volume on the basis of a prospectus. The last few interactions that we've had with Dominic, Susan, and myself, it's been quite clear that he will at a minimum ask for about half of the book to be finished and reviewed before even thinking about issuing a contract. And in many instances, or some instances, he said he won't send it out to review until the entire edited volume is complete. So he's really, I think, and he would say this himself, concerned about high variance in quality across chapters within edited volumes, and is wary of issuing a contract on the basis of only the best chapters, and then the other chapters being less not up to par. So that has changed. There are fewer of them being published, but they still are published and they're still coming out. And I think, like Susan said, when they have a coherent theme, then it's more likely. I think we're coming to the end of the time. There's 5 minutes left. Are there any final questions from anyone? If not, I see that the case here is posted in the chat that the video that Susan and Dominic did is now on demand. So feel free to take a look at that. As always, you're welcome to email me, and Susan doesn't want to receive emails anymore. Now it's Nicole Bolier. But feel free to email Nicole and myself, and thank you, Susan, for doing this for 6 years, of course. And thank you to our panelists.